All right, yo. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the stream. Hope everyone's doing well. And yeah, today I want to cover hi-hats. It's kind of a fun topic to get into. I don't have a ton of time today, but I figure we can kind of just like really quickly jump into something. Um, because hi-hats are kind of interesting in terms of how you make them interesting in a beat. And there's actually some tried and true techniques. We'll start off with some of them, even if some of them feel like they're subtle at first to do. It's kind of funny because, anything that makes your beat or your musical idea 10% better, let's say, if you do that 10 of those things, they could be pretty small things too. You make something that's twice as better, right? So even though they can seem like subtle things, they're really useful. And then there's things that are just not so subtle, like things that make your beat really cool and maybe more experimental techniques that you might not have heard of. So there's a lot of cool things. And we're just going to build something right off the bat. We'll get started with it. And feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have something you want to cover. Let's just grab a hi-hat from Ableton. You could do everything that we're doing here today in FL Studio, Logic, whatever DAW you use. And they're just kind of cool techniques. We're going to run through all of them. Let's try and grab something that's sort of simple sounding. Maybe we'll go over to just going to look for a hi-hat that is a little more natural sounding. It's going to depend maybe on the genre too. But a lot of what I want to do today is based off of groove, right? So groove is incredibly important. And the purpose of this being the way people typically start out, a musical idea. And there was a Rick Beato video. I'm sure some people have heard of Rick Beato. He's big on YouTube. About the reality of a lot of today's music because it's built in a computer and it's stuck to the grid. And the fact that beats can be kind of lifeless because of that. And it's actually a really justified criticism. It's true. We tend to lack a natural sound in what we do. And the music can kind of end up sounding sort of static. So one of the things I like to do, you just go ahead and grab a decent live snare, is we'll get a basic beat going. And let's see here, find some good snares. And we'll just grab something kind of short. That'd be fine. And we'll put this on the 2 and the 4. And let's move these over to tighter subdivision. And if any of you guys haven't seen, we did a live stream on triplets. So using triplet form in your beats. And that kind of goes along with some of the things that we did in that video. There's not a whole lot that we're going to recover from that, but that's also like a really fun stream we did. A pretty short one too. And we covered a lot of interesting techniques using delays. So a little more plugin kind of related stuff, but there's some really basic things that we can cover right off the bat. And this is kind of just simulating like, what someone might do either in their channel rack in FL or using a drum rack in Ableton or what we have here, like audio samples. And someone might end up doing something like this. And they start building out a beat, right? And so we could just get something really simple going. It would help if we had audio on, right? Let's see here. Fix that. So pretty dead simple, right? I mean, there's not a whole lot kind of going on with the beat. We could fix a couple of things just to make it sort of sound a little more how we want it to sound. So maybe we'll go in here. And I'm just going to shape this a little bit more. Just try and make the samples sound a little more together, some EQ. All right, cool. So now we have a beat. So this is obviously going to sound way more static, right? Because it's so machinically put together. And it is true, there's things that you can do within the DAW itself to create more interest, right? Like you could go, and Ableton's very famous for having groove tracks or groove templates, or they're called groove something. And basically, if I was triggering everything with Midi, I could throw that into the track and that would provide variation. That's one way to do it. But in this case, because other DAWs might not have that sort of thing, I tend to put it into just audio samples on the screen. So you could take these techniques and apply it to any DAW. But if you like the groove stuff in Ableton, that's really cool too. That's a lot of fun stuff to get into. Maybe we'll do a stream where we just use the groove templates with MIDI. But in this case, we want to do it, and then you have more flexibility if you do it this way. So what I tend to do is I go in, and I'm going to go into what we call slip mode. So Control 4 or Command 4. And now I'm going to push the hi-hats back. It could be like a 16th, a 32nd note. But they're just going to be basically slightly late compared to everything else. And you can experiment. You kind of go zoom in real far and just nudge a little bit. You'll find that the more you push the hi-hats back, the more it pulls the groove. So the kick and the snare are basically up front, and the hi-hat has this sort of lazy sound. And this was something that was done by real drummers back in the day, famous drummers that influenced a lot of soul, funk, music, and jazz, where they would play with playing behind the beat. And when I talked about Rick Beato earlier, it's really cool because he would even go into like this thing talking about records that were not made in DAWs. And the way you could tell, you could listen to like something like Nirvana, for instance, is there was sort of a pause before the one at basically every measure. And that's what made music have this sort of quality of like groove and pocket and feel that when you're on a grid and everything is machinically on beat one every time, you actually lack that. So your music ends up having this sort of static quality. So just pushing your hi-hats back a little bit is going to go a long way. But because most people never leave quantize mode or lock to grid mode, right? They never really try this. And I guess actually more appropriately, the best way to do this is we could A/B them, right? So we can really kind of test out this idea. So maybe we'll take this one. This one will be the stock one where everything's just snapped. And this one will be the one where we're experimenting, pushing things back a little bit more in the hi-hats specifically. And it's super easy to do. You can do this in MIDI. It doesn't really matter. There's a lot of great information about famous producers in lo-fi hip hop, especially, but other genres too. Everyone from Jay Dilla to a lot of the pop guys out there today, like Mark Ronson, that use this kind of technique because they know that it provides groove. So here's the stock one. Now the difference is really slight in this one, so let's exaggerate it so we can really hear the difference, right? So this one, looks like it's almost a 16th back a little bit, so we're gonna over embellish a little bit, and let's see how this one feels. Listen to 2 measures of each. So you can really hear that difference. Again, 1 measure of totally snapped in, and then 2 measures of laid back hi-hats. So you could probably hear the difference. It's confusing because visually we can't really see that, so maybe we'll make this one a different color. So anyone just coming into the stream, you can hear the difference in just slightly pushing hi-hats back. Go into slip mode on your respective DAW and try this out. It's a really useful technique. Immediately adds groove. So I really like that, and it does actually kind of sound a little more natural in a lot of ways, because the hi-hat isn't supposed to be this thing that is just machinically there. Even in genres of music where you might expect that, like techno or house, not necessarily, right? So that's one technique. I'm just gonna make sure my stream did not crash on us. Okay, it looks like we're good. Okay. It crashed last time, so I just want to make sure. Okay, and then the benefit of going into audio sample mode like this is that you can actually then just mess around with the clips. So volume level is a huge thing because that provides velocity, and then pitch is a big thing too. So we could look at maybe 1 measure of this hi-hat pattern. Is that 1 measure? Yeah, that's 1 measure. And you're kind of looking for where you add accents. So again, these are small things, but they're super quick to do. So maybe add 2 dB onto this one. Actually, let's embellish a little bit just so we can hear the difference. So that's a perfect example of an accent, right? So it's going to allow us to really hear that differentiation. And I love this technique because it does make things sound more natural. Even if the genre or the drum sound that you're going for is not meant to emulate a real life drummer, this is still something that I think our ears are naturally attracted to because we grow up listening to music or people playing the drums, and it gives this human quality that we inherently understand. So that's just my theory though. Right, so now you have an accent. And these are a little embellished. Maybe we'll go with like 5 on here. And I'll go with 3 on the other strong beat. So it's going 6030 on the clip gain. And because this is lo-fi hip hop, I'm just going to make things a little bit Another thing that you can actually do is mess around with pitch. Pitch is another one. So just like you might have lesser volume to embellish the accent in the weak beats. So these would be the weak beats, right? We'll give them colors. So our weak beats are in white. So just like you might do the volume, the level, you might also do the pitch. And that's going to make a difference. But slightly lower. I mean, I even go, you don't have to bring it down 12 semitones or something. You could. If it sounds cool, it sounds cool. But you also have fine pitch. So fine pitch is, we look in the definition, according to Ableton, transposition of 100 cents per one semitone, right? So one semitone in music is like a half step on your piano. And in this case, we're looking at cents. So you get 100 per semitone. So this is actually really useful, because if I was to just go and take this one and pull this down like negative 50 cents, it's going to allow me to push things down just slightly in pitch. It doesn't even have to be one semitone, but like I said, just experiment with this. But notice how I'm doing it on the weak beats. So it's allowing me to provide that natural differentiation. Now you notice that you can really hear it now. So then I might even pull back a little bit and try negative 25 cents. But you can see that I'm really being ginger about it, because our ears are very sensitive to pitch. Right? So that's allowing you to like, okay, now you know what to expect. So that's a pretty fun thing. We'll set these to like negative 15. And then some of the weak beats could have a little more variation than others, so you can kind of play around with that. You could do the same thing with pitch, with volume as well. So I'll go over here. This one will just be like, maybe these actually will be a little bit normal. So there you go. And even simple things like subtracting one of those hi-hats, that provides interest in a beat if you just take one of them away where you normally wouldn't think. And that's a little more of like a pattern-oriented way of thinking, but a lot of times if you think your beats kind of just sound boring, just taking one or two hi-hats away allows you to create a point where you create a lot of groove in your track. So that's like a very simple thing. And we're just kind of going through these things like rapid fire. You can try out all these things. A lot of times they do get overlooked. Another thing is the open hi-hat. So when you have a pattern that's simple like this, a lot of times adding an open hi-hat, it could be on the weak beat or the strong beat, is a really nice move. Let's just quickly find one. And I really love this move because I think it actually accentuates like emphasis in a beat even more. So maybe we'll go over here. Let's get open hi-hats, live sounds, and just find anything. That's a cool one. We'll throw that in. And this is one of my favorite techniques because it immediately makes a beat way more interesting. And like I said, you could put it on the strong beat or the weak beat. So let's try weak first, because a lot of people, whether they know it or not, are used to hearing it in this context when they hear a live drummer play it. So maybe we'll mute this one. I'm going to hit 0 to deactivate the clip. And we're going to basically dial this one in where that one was. Now, it doesn't exactly sound like it's coming from the same hi-hat, but we're just playing around with the first sound we grab, so you get an idea of the idea. Get an idea of the idea. There you go. And then another thing I'd like to do is then add in a quick little skip kind of sound. So maybe this is just going to hit sort of like that. But because you want to keep it from sounding machinic, right? Pull the drift or the fine pitch down a little bit. Take a little bit of heat off of it. And now you've got tons of character in that sound, which is really fun. You know, you can just imagine now how much you've changed something from where we started at the start of the stream. I'm sorry if anyone's just joining us. We kind of are trying to go super fast today, but just adding on different things to make hi-hats just more interesting. And we could even try some of the delay stuff as well. I think it's a lot of fun. And these can be subtle things. These can be not so subtle things too, right? So just get some chords on this just to have fun with it. Give it some context, you know. Grab this thing. Sorry, I don't have my chordy app turned on, but we're not talking about chords today anyway, so just get something in there real quick. Okay, so we've got a cool little music clip to go along with it. Just grab whatever. We're not trying to obsess over the actual beat too much. So but I think the main point is that with hi-hats, it basically took us, let's see, what did we do? We pushed things back with slip mode, right? So we're not locked to the grid anymore. We changed the actual clip gain. So we changed the levels and some of those things to provide accents. We changed a little bit of the pitch, but we did it with fine pitch. So we didn't necessarily grab stuff, hi-hats, and push it down 6 semitones and make it sound all weird and funky and, you know, EDM sounding. We just changed the pitch slightly based on the specific clip. So again, that's the benefit of using audio instead of MIDI, at least in this DAW on this screen, right? You could still do it with MIDI. It's all right. And then we added some open hi-hat accent and a quick little skip subdivision at the end here. So like basically we added a little bit of variation. It's literally like 3 steps. And you immediately make your hi-hats sound more natural, more interesting, and a little funkier, basically. They're just more funky. So for lo-fi hip-hop, it's really, really useful. And other genres too, obviously. And you could carry these techniques into a pop track, an R&B track, a hip-hop track, a boom bap style track, whatever. You know, it's just going to add more to those hi-hats and make them less static and machinic sounding, right? You could take it a step further. You might have saw me actually grab, I went parallel with the piano just to add a little ping pong delay effect. That's low key something that we did a ton of when we were working in triplet mode to add ghosts to those things. You can do it with snares especially. There's not a lot of space in the hi-hat in this particular pattern, but you could still do it. You know, it's just something you kind of dial in there to add a little more syncopation to what you're hearing. And you can have a lot of fun with it. You could even try it with triplet form. That's why they give you this option here. So I could go dual echo, have triplet eighths and triplet Let's see, maybe triplet quarter notes. We'll just isolate it, hear what it sounds like. But this is parallel, right? So 100% wet, and it's on its own chain, right? So that way we can control the balance over here. So it sounds pretty crazy on its own. What we're going to do is take off a lot of the highs so it doesn't stand out as much. Maybe we'll switch this to triplet half note. I'm even going to just take the EQ and shape it even more on that one chain, which you can ISO with this. And for instance, I really don't need to have that tappy part of the frequency. You can kind of just scoop that out. You can see it's a much darker version of that hi-hat. Another technique that's kind of cool if you're trying to take some of the edge off the hi-hat when you're doing these little details is grab a chorus, because it actually kind of messes up the transient. Or you can use a transient designer. I think a lot of people have this with native instruments. That kind of smooths it out. So you go from really tappy to kind of blunted. And it's just tucked there under the bottom. This is getting pretty funky already. So that's another thing you can do. We did a lot of that. We did a bunch of stuff with triplets, and I think it was the last stream. I think the last stream we did voice leading stuff, like reharmonization stuff. That was a lot of fun. But it's on the channel. If you want to check out the live stream page on the channel, there's a whole thing. We did a crazy amount of stuff with triplet forms. It was a ton of fun. So that's a lot of fun. Another thing too is actually the processing on the hi-hat itself goes a long way. I did some of it. I actually just EQ'd some things with these random samples just to make them sound a little more together. But in lo-fi hip-hop, it's really important on the hi-hats. Again, you're not looking for a super pristine sound. And there's a ton of lo-fi plugins you can use, or stock ones you can rely upon that will get you there. Just kind of knowing what you're looking for. I tend to go for like convolution, which is something I'll show you in a second. And it's so easy to do. And then maybe some other elements like some reverb and some compression to sort of make the hi-hats sit in a really nice place in the beat. So we already have a really interesting hi-hat sound. Here's one thing you'll see people take out all the time. It just has a cool sound, so we'll just listen to it. I think because this is sort of an all-in-one thing, you can add a lot of character to one particular track. Or if you want to put this on a bus track or your master bus even, you could do a lot with it. So I love the noise it adds. You notice when you add wobble and you turn the rate down, I tend to use these 3 modules the most. The distortions are also really nice on this. And then you can control everything with a mix knob up here, which is super convenient. And they even have an EQ, which can come in handy. So now just kind of doing those moves. And you'll notice that I have this open hi-hat right here. And this is another thing you might do, because if you have a bunch of hi-hats on different tracks, you just pull them into a group track. So Command G, Control G, and you have sort of a hats bus. You can do this in FL Studio in the mixer window. You just assign things to their own specific chain. And then the moves I did with the RC20 I'll put on there. That way the open sound gets a little more of that low pass on it, so they feel like they're playing together a little more, right? Bus processing is really huge for that. It really comes in handy. There's some other things I like to do too. There's some other plugins that are kind of go-tos, especially when I have different sounds that I'm trying to make them work together. Bus processing is really useful for that. So I might even grab something like a tape machine. This has a really cool mastering plugin, which is basically just like it just adds some compression, and there's different kind of gradients that they give you. So this one's kind of cool. And you can even experiment with having a group within a group. So I'll have my bus group, and I'll take the same exact thing and apply it to the bus as well. Might take away a lot from the kick in this particular setting, but you have others that are a little more just easier on the track. You could also go for this one. But even if you're not using like third-party plugins necessarily, there's a lot of stuff you could use within your DAW. Like I always tell people with FL Studio, Destructor is low-key one of the best things to use. Right now we're in Ableton today, but you can do all this stuff. Like if I turned all this stuff off, let's say, and I just want to make the hi-hats seem a little more lo-fi, in Ableton, and this applies to any DAW by the way, if you have any kind of amp emulation or speaker emulation plugin, it's basically a convolution effect. So that's going to, and that's why they even put it in the drive and color folder in Ableton, because it changes the color of something dramatically. And on hi-hats, you don't even necessarily have to reach for an EQ a lot of times. You just grab this thing and mess around with the way it like it immediately sounds way older. So let's just A/B it real quick without. With. So it sounds way more like you sampled it. That's one of my favorite moves. Turn it back onto stereo, maybe go 50%. So it loses some of that like pristine edge that a lot of samples and just digital audio in general is going to have. And that can work really well in the context of like lo-fi hip hop, right? I actually like the sound of this more than the RC20. to be honest. I just think this sounds even better. Prod, that's a great question. I see your question, buddy. It's just more control. It just depends. You know, like EQs, you could put EQs in 2 categories, or maybe 3. So you have the EQ that's in your plugin, right? So like RC20, where is RC20? Take a look at it. It's sort of giving you an EQ. This isn't really, it's more like a filter. But you can play around with it, and they give it to you as an option to sort of just dial in the sound a little bit more, but most likely you don't have a great interface or options to really dial it in compared to, you know, one of these third-party things you pay money for, like Pro Q3, which you can go nuts with, right? And even has dynamics you can tag to the actual frequency, almost like a multi-band compressor kind of thing. So you have more control with the third-party plugin. But there's also this like third category of plugin EQs. Some you might hear people call them color EQs, and basically they might lack the interface as well compared to like Pro Q3, but they're just amazing for, well, the color that they provide. Very famous ones like Pewtech are really great for this. And they're fun to play around with because you can move the knobs around quite a bit and shape the timbre of something to a great effect. And that's why they come in handy. So I put them in two general ideas. Like you have corrective EQ, which is sort of the Pro Q3, which is very kind of clinical. Some people might use, you know, terms like transparent, all these kind of terms that we throw around. It has a sound. Pro Q3 is very musical sounding, but it has this sort of clinical aspect to it. So a lot of times you're correcting things, being subtractive, for instance. And when you want to be additive and you want to push things up and really embellish frequencies and sculpt something and have fun with the sound, you might use something that's modeled after a classic piece of gear, which is famous for what it did. When you could just move the knobs and everything really sounded good through it, basically, right? Like the Pewtech. So yeah, this is a pretty cool plugin. This is just a Waves plugin. You can get these for super cheap, by the way. They run sales basically every day. And you would grab this and maybe... This is a passive EQ, so you can really push knobs around as well. So yeah, I mean, long story short, to answer your question, you can have fun with it. You can use a plugin EQ separately for more control, and you've got kind of 2 general categories of EQ in terms of why you have them, right? So that kind of idea. But that's a great question. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to get really quick into some of the more weird stuff that you can do, which is a lot of fun. I'm in Ableton right now. You can do this in FL. I know that's another popular DAW. You can do this in Logic. You can automate basically anything in your DAW, right? So automation is huge. Some techniques that I like to do, I actually like to automate a reverb because I think when you're trying to add something a little bit different, people will grab a reverb and it becomes this static idea that they add onto their track, which is okay. But I tend to think like when you use reverb parallel, it doesn't have to just be something you're adding in for this static color. And I'm going to show you what I mean in a second. So we'll grab a reverb and people add them in and then they kind of dial in the sound. And that's cool. It puts the hi-hat in a cool acoustic space, which I like. So kind of breathes out in the distance more. That's cool. I like that. But you don't have to necessarily just do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call this one automated reverb. And this one's actually going to be a different kind of effect. We're just going to isolate the hi-hat. I'm going to go for a shorter decay reverb, typically called an ambient reverb. You can see in the plugins here, if we go to some of these things, you can see that they have a shorter decay. It's got a cool sound, right? So the short decay, a lot of times people are like, why would I even use short decay? Like, what does this even do? They're really good for adding a live action to a drum or a guitar, and they have a nice color effect to them as well. So what I do is I actually automate out the sound of this effect. So here we go. And because you can automate the chain volumes in your audio effect rack, this is where actually a lot of the creativity of parallel processing comes in as well, right? So you can mess around with your things. Like I might go here and create this cool sort of ramping effect. It's basically like I'm creating an envelope underneath. Check that out. Oh yeah, you could throw the Pewtech on everything. Though I use color EQ. I just throw it everywhere because, like, you never know, man. Like, you could throw it on something and just, you might find like a spot in the bass or the hi-hat where it's just doing something so cool. Especially on vocals. If I want to get a vocal sound for my artists that I want them to be like, wow. Sometimes I'm grabbing a color EQ, especially in Logic, and I'm pushing things around a lot, you know, to find like a cool sweet spot for their voice. So this is immediately like so much more interesting than what we started with, right? Where people have just like the hi-hat and it's just and there's nothing happening, you know? And what am I playing in my piano? Nothing. I got like 2 chords, super repetitive and annoying. But this is like, your ear can handle this repetitively. I mean, we're almost out of time. I'm sorry, everyone. I got to run out the door. I just want to get a quick stream in today for you guys and have some fun with stuff. Here's another one, though, real quick. So we go in and automate out a long decay reverb. Maybe it's a weird reverb. These chaotic ones are cool. And this one ramps down. So it goes all the way down. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I can shape the line and just hit Control D or Command D to duplicate that automation quickly. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry, everybody. You want this guy. Goes down. Cool curve. Duplicate. So there you go, some cool techniques you can use with your hi-hats. They don't have to be super crazy. You know, you get into automation. I think tomorrow I want to do a quick stream where we get into even more experimental stuff. Actually just giving yourself unique samples that you can pull from sequencers and other kind of stuff that you probably have just sitting in your DAW and you don't even know it, to get really interesting hi-hats, tops, shaker sounds, but basically you're not reliant on kind of really static sounding stuff, you know. It's just going to give you a ton of creative freedom with it. So hope you guys found this interesting. I know it's a quick stream today. I got to run out the door. But make sure you hit the bell icon, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this today. Hit the bell icon. You won't miss streams when they happen. And the link in the description below is to a bunch of free stuff. So enjoy that. But yeah, I got to run out the door. So thank you all for coming in. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. I'll see y'all next time. Take care.